Communists were agents of Satan. Fascism, Adams told us, always cloaked itself in a nation's most cherished symbols and rhetoric. And fascism would come to America not in the guise of stiff-armed, marching brown shirts and Nazi swastikas, but in the mass recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance, the biblical sanctification of the state, and the sacralization of American militarism. Adams was the first person I heard label the extremists of the Christian right as fascists. And liberals, he warned, as in Nazi Germany, would be blind to the tragic dimension of history and radical evil, and would not react until it was too late. This, I fear, is Trump's legacy, the empowerment of the Christian fascists. They are what comes next. Noam Chomsky, for this reason, was right when he warned that Pence was more dangerous than Trump during the impeachment hearings. For decades, the Christian fascists have been organizing to take power. They have built infrastructures and organizations, including lobbying groups, schools, colleges, and law schools, as well as media platforms to prepare. They have seeded their cadre into positions of power, while we on the left have seen our institutions and organizations destroyed or corrupted by corporate power and been seduced by the boutique activism of identity politics. FRC Action, the legislative affiliate of the Family Research Council, already gives 245 members of Congress a 100% approval rating for supporting legislation that is backed by the Christian right. This Christian fascism is an emotional life raft for tens of millions of Americans. It is impervious to science and verifiable fact. The Christian fascists by choice have severed themselves from rational thought and the secular society that almost destroyed them and their families and thrust them into deep despair.
Church of Judas replaces all Christianity,
We
which
will
is
not
all
placate
corrupt.
or disarm this movement bent on our destruction by attempting to claim that we too have Christian values. This appeal only strengthens the legitimacy of the Christian fascists and weakens our own.
All Christianity is corrupt.
These
Only Church
dispossessed
of
people
Judas will be
will
Jesus
either
Church.
be reintegrated into the economy and the society, and their shattered social bonds mended, or
Church
the
of Judas is
movement
the
will
only
grow
thing that can do
more
that.
virulent and more powerful. The Christian right is determined to keep the public focus on societal or ethical as opposed to economic issues. The corporate media, whether it supported or opposed the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, almost exclusively discussed her opposition to abortion and membership in People of Praise, a far-right Catholic sect that practices speaking in tongues. What our corporate masters, along with the Christian fascists, did not want examined was Barrett's subservience to corporate power, her hostility to workers, civil liberties, unions, and environmental regulations. And since the Democratic Party is beholden to the same donor class as the Republican Party, and since the media long ago substituted the culture wars for politics, the most ominous threat posed by Barrett and the Christian right was and is ignored. The road to despotism is always paved with righteousness. All fascist movements paper over their squalid belief systems with a veneer of morality. They mouth pieties about restoring law and order, right and wrong, the sanctity of life, civic and family virtues, patriotism and tradition, to mask their dismantling of the open society and silencing and persecution of those who dissent.
Because they're evil
The Christian
Nazis.
right, awash in money from corporations that understand their political intent, will use any tool, no matter how devious, from right-wing armed militias to the invalidation of ballots, to attempt to block Biden and Democratic candidates from assuming office.
But Jesus spits you out.
Capitalism driven by the obsession to maximize profit and reduce the cost of production by slashing workers' rights and wages is in fact antithetical to the Christian gospel as well as the Enlightenment ethic of Immanuel Kant.
And the only sin
But
that's never
capitalism in the hands
forgiven
of the Christian fascists has become sacralized in the form of the prosperity gospel.
is a
The
sin
belief
against
that
the Holy
Jesus
Spirit.
came to minister to our material needs, blessing believers with wealth and power.
That's the sin against
The
the Holy
prosperity
Spirit.
gospel is an ideological cover for the slow-motion
Nazism.
corporate coup d'etat.
It's Trumpism.
And this is why large corporations such as Tyson Foods, which places Christian right chaplains in its plants, Purdue, Walmart, and Sam's Warehouse, along with many other corporations, pour money into the movement and its institutions, such as Liberty University and Patrick Henry Law School.
So boycott
This
them
is
all.
why
Shut them down.
corporations gave millions to groups such as the Judicial Crisis Network and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to campaign for Barrett's appointment to the court.
Church of Judas replaces
Barrett
all
has
Christian
ruled to
churches.
cheat gig
Every
workers
one.
out of overtime.
According to
Greenlight
Jesus'
fossil
prophecy
fuel
2,000 years ago in
extraction,
the Gospel of
pollution,
Judas.
gut Obamacare,
Read my
and
book,
strip
The Book of Judas,
consumers
to
of
explain it.
protection from corporate fraud.
We say who
As a
this guy is.
circuit
He's
judge,
awesome.
she heard at least 55 cases in which citizens challenged corporate abuse, and she ruled in favor of corporations 76% of the time. Of course, our corporate masters do not care about abortion, gun rights, or the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. But like the German industrialists who backed the Nazi Party, they know that the Christian right will give an ideological veneer to ruthless corporate tyranny. These oligarchs view the Christian fascists the same way the German industrialists viewed the Nazis, as buffoons. They are aware that the Christian fascists will trash what is left of our anemic democracy.
Listen to what the NRA leadership said about their own
But they also
members.
know they will make huge profits in the
politicians they
process,
buy.
and the rights of workers and citizens will be ruthlessly suppressed. If you are poor, if you lack proper medical care, if you are paid substandard wages, if you are trapped in the lower class, if you are a victim of police violence, this is because, according to the prosperity gospel, you are not a good Christian.
This is KGNU
In this belief
4:44
system,
p.m. Mountain
you
Time.
deserve what you get.
88.5
There is
FM.
nothing wrong, these
Best radio
homegrown
station
fascists preach,
on the
with the
planet.
structures or systems of power. Like all totalitarian movements, followers are seduced into calling for their own enslavement. The tinder that could ignite violent conflagrations lies ominously stacked around us. Millions of disenfranchised Americans who see no way out of their economic and social misery, struggling with an emotional void, are seething with rage against a corrupt ruling class and bankrupt liberal elite that betrayed them and, they believe, stole the election.
AOC
They are tired of the political
2024.
stagnation,
If Bernie doesn't run.
grotesque, mounting social inequality, and the punishing fallout from the pandemic. Millions more alienated young men and women, also locked out of the economy with no realistic prospect for advancement or integration, gripped by the same emotional void, have harnessed their fury in the name of tearing down the governing structures and anti-fascism. These polarized extremes are inching closer and closer to violence. We have three options left: reform, which given the decay in the American body politic is impossible, revolution, or tyranny. If the corporate state is not overthrown, then America will soon become a naked police state where any opposition, however tepid, will be silenced with draconian censorship or force. Police in cities around the country have already thwarted the reporting by dozens of journalists covering the protests through physical force, arrest, tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray.
YouTube does the same
This
thing.
will
You can't
become
even search a
normalized.
protest. You can
The
only find
huge
right-wing lead
social
streams where
divides, often
fascists
built
make fun of
around race,
protesters.
will be used by the Christian fascists to set neighbor against neighbor. Armed Christian patriots will attack those groups blamed for social collapse and fraudulent elections.
Or we'll shut
Dissent,
them down
even
before they
nonviolent
can.
dissent, will become treason. Peter Drucker observed that Nazism succeeded not because people believed in its fantastic promises, but in spite of them. Nazi absurdities, he pointed out, had been witnessed by a hostile press, a hostile radio, a hostile cinema, a hostile church, and a hostile government, which untiringly pointed out the Nazi lies, the Nazi inconsistency, the unattainability of their promises, and the dangers and folly of their course.
But people
Nobody,
didn't
he wrote,
revolt
would have
and
been
throw
a
it over.
Nazi if rational belief in the Nazi promises had been a prerequisite. The poet, playwright, and socialist revolutionary Ernst Toller was forced into exile and stripped of his citizenship when the Nazis took power in 1933, wrote in his autobiography, "The people are tired of reason, tired of thought and reflection. They ask, what has reason done in the last few years? What good have insights and knowledge done us?" After Toller committed suicide in 1939, W.H. Auden, in his poem In Memory of Ernst Toller, wrote, We are lived by powers we pretend to understand. They arrange our loves. It is they who direct at the end the enemy bullet, the sickness, or even our hand. Once the internal enemies are purged from the nation, we are promised America will recover its lost glory, except that once one enemy is obliterated, another takes its place. Crisis cults require a steady escalation of conflict
The only real
and a
enemy is
steady
fascism.
stream of victims.
And they're
Every
the
new
enemy of even
crisis
the people
becomes
who
more
believe in
urgent
them.
and more extreme than the last. This is what made the war in the former Yugoslavia inevitable. Once one stage of conflict reaches a crescendo, it loses its efficacy and must be replaced by an ever more brutal and deadly confrontation, what Ernst Jünger called
Gotta
a
stop him
feast of
before it
death.
starts.
These crisis cults are, as Drucker understood, irrational and schizophrenic. They have no coherent ideology. They turn morality upside down. They appeal exclusively to emotions. Burlesque and spectacle become politics. Depravity becomes morality. Atrocities and murder, as the federal marshals who gunned down